as an apostle, as coming there and starting that congregation, it certainly would have been right for you to have supported me. And we'll get to that. He says very plainly, a little later. Do we not have the right to take along a believing wife? Paul had given up his right or his liberty to have a wife go along with him. Why did he do that?
He wanted all his focus to be on God and teaching.
Exactly. So the same reason that he had advised some of those, because of the present distress, not to get married. So he had given up this liberty so that he could focus on Christ. He said others apostles do. I don't know which ones in particular he's talking about there, but other apostles do. The brothers of the Lord. There's evidence there that Jesus was not an only child, that Mary had other children. When he talks about the brothers of the Lord, and they were married. And Cephas. Who was Cephas? Yeah. Even Peter was married. Isn't that strange? Why is that an oddity, Brian?
Well, and I think he's being consistent here. I never caught this. He didn't say don't we have the right to take a wife. He says a believing wife. And that's consistent with what he's talked about before. Would you agree?
Yeah.
Okay. I mean, I don't know if he's saying it would have been a sin to take a wife that wasn't a believer. Unless it's the widow.
There would have been I think there's kind of a distinction here. He's talking about here him being supported by the church. He takes along a wife that's a non-believer.
Yeah, good point.
Would the church have the obligation to support a non-believer even if it's his wife? No. A church has an obligation to support Christians. So if he took along a believing wife, then he would have had freedom for the church to support him and his wife. But he said other apostles were doing that. Cephas was doing that. The first pope did that, right?
That's what it says on the interweb, that he was the first pope.
Yeah. And if you go and you research that a little bit about Peter being the first pope and him being married, some Catholics are at least clear-headed enough that they cannot deny that Peter was married. Okay, they don't deny that he was married. The scriptures are too plain, and then they'll say, well, several popes were married. That requirement that priests and others not be married didn't come around the 11th century or something like that.
Well, for them, it's easy to defend all that because they say the Pope has a right to change Scripture and come up with it's all inspired throughout this lineage of, the popes that go through the years. So they're allowed to, they accept, new changes all the time, as they go along. So they can easily justify in their minds why it's being, changed.
Yeah. Now, some of your more hardcore Catholics will tell you Peter was not married. They'll say when Jesus there in Matthew chapter 8 went and healed Peter's mother-in-law, you notice that his wife was never mentioned. She was dead. She must have passed away by that time. Or before he became Pope, that him and his wife, and this is another thing that I'll tell you, him and his wife separated for the cause of Christ. Didn't Paul just say, don't separate? So that would have been violation of Scripture. But they really have a problem with this one in verse 5, because Peter, at this point, which mid to late 50s, would have still been leading around a believing wife.
20 years after Christ died.
Absolutely. So that does cause them a problem there. But he says there in verse 6, and I thought it was funny he mentioned Barnabas here, because he's not traveling with Barnabas. Barnabas isn't traveling with him at this point. But he says, is it just me and Barnabas that don't have the right not to work? Is it just me and Barnabas that have to go into town and work for a living and not be supported by the church? And evidently Barnabas had made the same decision that Paul had made. Now the others hadn't, but these two evidently had. He used the examples. Who's going to go to war at their own expense? What soldier is going to go into battle and the nation that he's fighting for not support him. You know, you don't do that at your own expense. And you plant a vineyard, you eat of it. He gets on down there to verse 9 and talks about, you know, the ox. You shall not muzzle an ox while it treads out the grain. And I thought that was pretty good that he says that was not written for the ox. That was written for us. If somebody's out there doing the work, and he's talking about somebody out doing the work of the church, then certainly they should be supported by the church. And it is rightful for them to be supported by the church.
And that applies to elders too. 1 Timothy 5, it mentions about elders can be paid also for their work.
Exactly. And counted worthy of double honor. Any other thoughts on that? We'll double your pay, Brian. Mike?
Yeah, you know, this kind of goes along with what Paul says over in Galatians on why he had Titus circumcised and not Timothy, right? I mean, I think that's the same kind of concept. He's like, look, it was for your benefit, where it was for the benefit of the believers or the non-believers where he was traveling, that he did certain things. He wouldn't take Timothy with him in certain situations because of the circumcision, where he would take Titus because it wasn't a big deal.
I think you've got them flipped.
I did. I said them backwards.
Yeah, that's okay.
Right. So he was considering his audience and how they would interpret his actions. So if him and Barnabas are going to the Corinthians and speaking to them, he is considering their best interest in something like this as well. It's continually that same pattern of Paul thinking about his brethren and what is the most effective way so that he's not putting any stumbling block in front of them.
The overall point he's making here is, I'm giving things up for the cause of Christ. You should give things up for the cause of Christ. But the smaller point here is that I'm not taking any money. I'm not out here preaching for the money. You can't accuse me of preaching for the money. You've got other people there that have been preaching for the money, that are telling you that I'm not an apostle. What benefit am I getting from this? It's kind of the lesser point that he's making in all of this.
Well, he wasn't taking money from them.
He wasn't taking money from them.
He did take money while he was there from other churches.
Yeah, Philippi in particular.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, so I guess what I'm saying is that he's bringing that kind of subtly, bringing that in too. I didn't take it from you guys. I
Right.
want to be safe.
Right.
That you wouldn't have something to object.
He must have felt pretty confident about that bunch of Philippi.
Oh,
Yeah, he was real confident about them. But he knew evidently from the beginning that there were probably going to be some problems at Corinth. You just think about the city that they were in. All right, goes on in verse 11. And he says, if we have sown spiritual things for you, is it a great thing if we reap your material things? That's what we're talking about. He said, I came in and taught you things that are eternal in nature, taught you spiritual things. He said, it's not a big deal if we reap material things. In other words, if we benefit physically from preaching the gospel to you. He said, that's not a big deal. He says, if others are partaker of this right over you, are we not even more? You've had other preachers come in, and you've supported them. But you hadn't supported us. And he's not saying that he wanted them to support him. He's making that point. Other preachers came in, and probably some of these false teachers who were claiming that Paul was not an apostle. There'll be some of these who had come in and were taking money. He said that they were worthy of it. We should be even more, because he was an apostle. He was the one that established that church there. He says, nevertheless, we have not used this right, but endure all things, lest we hinder the gospel of Christ. He said, you know why I didn't take any money from you? I didn't want to hinder the gospel of Christ. I didn't want anybody there to be able to say, well, that Paul, he's just in it for the money. He just came down here to teach you these things just so that he can line his own pockets. He's just greedy. That's all it was about with him. How much money did y'all gave him? A bunch of money, didn't you? He says, you'll never be able to say that about me. You'll never be able to say that about me. You'll never be able to say that I preached to you for the money. I did not want to hinder the gospel of Christ there. Any comments down through verse 12? We're going to see this as Paul's attitude several times. That the reason that he was doing the things he was doing, the reason he was giving up things he was giving up, the reason that he was acting the way he was acting was so that he wouldn't hinder the gospel of Christ. He goes on kind of along the same idea here in verses 13 to 14. Do you not know that those who minister the holy things eat of the things of the temple? And those who serve at the altar partake of the offerings of the altar? Even so, the Lord has commanded that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. That's pretty plain, isn't it? He said, you know back there in Jerusalem when they bring the offerings in, the sacrifices into Jerusalem, that the priests get part of that sacrifice. They were familiar with this. This was what was even going on in the idol temples. The priest got, after they burnt 3 or 4 hairs off the forehead of one of those things, and burnt the part that was no good, the priest got the rest of that meat. Well, even in Jerusalem, at the temple of God, even those priests were able to partake of those sacrifices. And he said, just basically in like manner, that those who preach the gospel should live from the gospel. If they're going to devote their life to that, then it's okay for you to pay them in order to do that. But again, Paul's saying, you hadn't paid me. You hadn't paid me, and I don't want any pay from you. Any thoughts down through verse 14?
It's an interesting way he says living, get their living by the gospel. That's kind of like saying, well, it's, I don't think the right word. It's not getting living from the gospel, but from what the gospel tells us to do. It's to contribute to the work of the Lord. So it's not the gospel, good news. That's what he's not getting. You see what I'm trying to say?
I thought I was, and now I'm not sure.
It's not literally the gospel that's getting the kids the living. It's what the gospel teaches. Does that make sense? Maybe not make sense.
Well, that's okay. That is fine. But yeah, they were teaching a gospel that gave life. Okay, it gave spiritual life. That's the spiritual things he was talking about that he provided. But also these preachers, he's saying that it was okay to support them with the material things for the life that they needed as far as physical things were concerned.
Hey, Lee, just as another kind of footnote to that, again in 14, he says, in the same way the Lord commanded, he clarifies, as he done previously, what his thoughts or opinions or, this is what he's saying versus what the Lord's saying. And again, he's clarified the Lord said this, not I. And again, he's just clarifying that this is the Lord's command that's allowed.
Yeah. I had a note here, but I've lost it.
I think I kind of see what Karen was saying in that if you look at it this way, that he says those who preach the gospel should receive their living from the gospel, and then the second gospel is the effects of preaching the gospel. In other words, he's basically calling those who obeyed the church the gospel. That's what I mean. In one sense, it is. If those accept the gospel, that's because of the gospel, of the good news. So I think that's maybe what you're trying to say here.
Yeah, kind of a roundabout way of saying,
I always do that.
I always thought it by the authority of the gospel. The gospel is allowed them to be able to provide for them.
Well, he said Jesus commanded that. Anybody remember where Jesus commanded that? When he sent out the limited commission, when he sent out the 70, he told them in Luke chapter 10 and verse 7. He said, when you go out, you go into the city and somebody takes you in, he said, remain in the same house, eating and drinking such things as they give you, for the laborer is worthy of his wage. Do not go from house to house. Laborer is worthy of his wage. These people were going out and preaching the gospel of the kingdom, the same thing that Jesus taught while he was here. And when they went into town and somebody took them in, they were going to provide for them. They were going to feed them, make sure they had the things that they needed. And he said when they do that, Just eat whatever they give you. Don't go from house to house. Don't go looking for a better deal somewhere else. You know, if you don't like chitlins and they've got chitlins, you know, just eat the chitlins and go on with it, okay? But don't pick up and go look for a T-bone steak next door. So just stay with where you're at, because why? Because the laborer is worthy of his hire. Any other thoughts?
I think it's interesting, he used the word, the Lord commanded that, although the Lord didn't say those exact words here. But the principle he laid down.
He commanded that
called
principle.
that a commandment.
Yeah.
The principle he laid down.
Yeah, that was a principle that he absolutely taught. All right, verse 15. He says, "But I have used none of these things, nor have I written these things that it should be done so to me." He says, "I'm not writing to you so that you'll do it for me now. That's not why I'm writing. For it would be better for me to die than that anyone should make my boast." He said, "I'd rather die than take money from you." He said, "I do not want you to be able to sit up there in Corinth and have these false teachers come in and say, you know what, Paul is just in it for the money. That's the only reason that he is doing this." He said, "I can sit back because of other churches." I think he said one time he robbed other churches. He took money from other churches in order to be able to preach at places like Corinth. And that kept Corinth from being able to say, or anybody that came in there, that Paul was doing it for the money. He says, verse 16, "For if I preach the gospel, I have nothing to boast of, for of necessity it is laid upon me. Yes, woe is me if I do not preach the gospel." Paul says, I've got an obligation to preach the gospel. Whether I'm paid or not, I have an obligation to preach the gospel. And who put that obligation on me? Jesus did. Yeah. Jesus told us, "I'm going to send you far from here to the Gentiles." He had an obligation laid on him. That was not something that he could not have refused to do. He was still a free will. But he was obligated as a servant of God to go out and preach the gospel. Now, verse 17. And I'm going to tell you what, I've looked at verse 17 in about as many different ways as I can, and it's difficult for me to reconcile all of it, but I think I've got the gist of it. In verse 16, we'll read 17 and 18. "For if I do this willingly, I have a reward, but if against my will, I have been entrusted with a stewardship. What is my reward then? That when I preach the gospel, I may present the gospel of Christ without charge, that I may not abuse my authority in the gospel." I think if we look at the context here, there was something that Paul had an obligation to do. That as a servant of God, that he was going to do, that he was not doing so much willingly. And that was preach the gospel. He had that obligation. He was a servant. He had to do that. But what was he doing willingly?
Not working. Not working.
Not taking
Not taking money from them. Yes.
He was not taking money from them willingly. He said, if I do this willingly, I have a reward. But what's the reward? There in verse 18. My reward is that when I preach the gospel, I may present the gospel of Christ without charge, that I may not abuse my authority in the gospel. He was willingly not taking money from them so that he could present the gospel free of charge. And that's a powerful thing. If somebody comes to you and they're trying to tell you about this great new thing they've got, it's a lot more effective to tell me about something and convince me about something that you've got that's so wonderful if you're not making money off the very same thing. Okay? Car dealer, you go to the car dealership and you go out and look at a used car. Well, here comes the car salesman, and nothing against car salesmen, but they're trying to make a living. I'll just say that. They're trying to make a living. And but you get out there and he comes out and he's telling you how great this car is, what a great good gas mileage, owned by some little old lady that drove it to church, you know, and that's the only place she ever went. It's just a fantastic car. It's easier for me to believe that when the guy that's telling me that isn't going to make money off the sale. Okay? And that's kind of what Paul's referring to here. He said, I come in and I preach the gospel to you free of charge. I had no benefit from it other than the reward, other than the joy of knowing that I could preach the gospel free of charge and that I was not abusing my liberties in Christ. I think that's the gist of it. I've got a little bit of trouble wrapping my head around what he's talking about there if he says, if I do it against my will. If I do it against my will, I've been entrusted with a stewardship. So maybe you've got some ideas on that, right?
If you're making your living off of preaching the gospel, you have an obligation to continue to preach whether you're excited about it or not. Right? I mean, maybe that's what I'm thinking. It's not like he's saying I have a stewardship and trust him. I've got a duty, I've got a responsibility because it's the only way I can make money. I can't do anything else if I'm doing this against my will. That's kind of how I took it. Like if he's excited about it, then he gets a different type of reward. But if he's getting paid for it and he's not excited about it, it's against his will, well, now it's just an obligation.
One of the things I've run across in some of the commentaries on this, and every one I read seemed to have a little bit different take on it, but that this against my will was referring back to him being a bondservant or a slave of Christ. He's just out there doing what he's supposed to do. And when the slave goes out and does what they were supposed to do they get extra pay for that? No, they've just done their job. They've just done their job. And maybe that's what he's talking about here. If I'm doing it against my will, I'm just doing my job. But he said, I've got this extra reward in the fact that I can take joy in knowing I preach the gospel free of charge.
I think Christians today can live the same way. We can say, okay, I'm going to do my duty as a Christian and do all these right things, or else we can take joy in knowing that it's pleasing God.
And we need to do that.
It's our choice.
Yep. Any other thoughts on it?
Just like he says in 19, he says, for thou I be free from all men, yet have I made myself servant unto all, that I might gain the more.
Okay. Yeah, he certainly made himself a servant to all. Any other thoughts before we move on into verses 19 through?
You maybe one way 24. You're going to experience this as an elder. There's things that you have to do that you do not want to do. And it's against your will. I mean, believe me, having to administer discipline, that is not something I want to do. Confronting someone that's in sin, I do not like confrontation. I don't do it voluntarily almost. I do it because I'm obligated. So I think that's kind of what he's saying. In some situations here, he preached it. He knew he's going to get beat. I don't think he did that voluntarily.
Yeah.
In other words, I can't wait to go in there and get my head beat up.
Yeah. Well, this is probably what he was dealing with most of this letter.
Yeah.
What gives you pause about that? What is your
this idea of what is he doing against his will? I'm just trying to reconcile what that is. I don't think he's saying he's preaching the gospel against his will, and certainly not taking money for preaching the gospel wasn't against his will. There's something there. It's just I don't know if it's the wording that's kind of got me a little confused. Any other thoughts?
You know, we have a church full of Christians here, 250 plus. Only 2 of you getting paid to spread the gospel. It's all of our jobs to spread the gospel, whether we're the 2 of you or we're the 248 of everybody else.
Right. And I will tell you this, if we got 200 plus of us spreading the gospel, it's going to be a lot more effective than 2. It's just the way it works.
But I'm just saying, not everybody's getting paid to
Right.
spread the gospel.
Right. Okay, let's go on to verse 19. We're going to go ahead and read through the end of the chapter here. He says, for though I am a free man, though I am free from all men, I have made myself a servant to all, that I might win the more. As we go through this, listen to Paul's reasoning, his reason that he's doing these things. Verse 19, that I might win the more. And to the Jews I became a Jew, that I might win Jews. to those who are under the law, as under the law, that I might win those who are under the law. To those who are without law, as without law, not being without law toward God, but under law toward Christ, that I might win those who are without law. To the weak, I become as weak, that I might win the weak. I have become all things to all men, that I might by all means save some. Now this I do for the gospel's sake, that I may be partaker of it with you. We'll go ahead and stop right there. Paul here, he said, I'm trying to fit in and be of as the least amount of offense to people as I can be within the gospel, okay, within the law of Christ. He said, in trying to fit in with the Jews, he said, I'm not going to violate the law of Christ. But would there have been anything wrong with Paul when he went back to Jerusalem to have sat back on Saturday and just not worked on Saturday? Because the rest of the Jews weren't. What do you think it would have done if he'd have been out working on Saturday? Oh, it would have turned a lot of those Jews off, wouldn't it? Yeah. What if Paul had sat down at the table and just pulled out a big old pork chop and started gnawing on it? That would have offended some of those Jews. So what do you think Paul ate when he was around the Jews? He ate the same food that the Jews would eat. He didn't work on Saturdays to offend them. He tried to fit in as much as he could within the confines of the law of Christ. The same thing with those who were without law. Talking about the Gentiles. He tried to fit in with them as much as possible without violating the law of Christ. He may have sat down there with them and had a pork chop. He knew there wasn't anything wrong with it. He may have sat down with them and eaten a meal that might have come, the meat might have come from an idol's temple. He didn't ask any questions. Because that's what he told them. If you sit down, don't ask any questions. Just go ahead and eat it. Because he recognized there was nothing to that. So he tries to fit in wherever he could. To the weak, I became as weak. Who do you think he's talking about there? To the weak, I become as weak.
Probably some of them.
Some of them. If you go back to chapter 8 and verse 7, he says, however, there is not in everyone that knowledge that an idol is nothing, and the meat that was offered to an idol was nothing. For some with consciousness of the idol until now eat it as a thing offered to an idol, and their conscience being weak is defiled. So what's Paul saying? To the weak I became as weak. He said, I'm not eating that in front of them. The same thing I don't want you to do, you who have knowledge, you who know everything. I want you to demonstrate love. And again, the purpose was that he might save some. His goal here was the salvation of men, all the way through this. Everything he did was geared towards saving others. He gave up a lot of things in order to save others. Now, if you listen real close, you might hear some more of that on Sunday morning. Self-denial. Self-denial. Willing to give up. And I'll go ahead and give y'all a sneak peek. Make you a list of what you've given up here recently for Christ. That's going to be a question we're going to ask Sunday morning. And I want hands and I want answers.
Our chance may be way down.
Any comments down through verse 23? All right, verse 24 through the end of the chapter. He says, do you not know that those who run in a race all run, but one receives a prize? Run in such a way that you may obtain it. He uses this physical race. We know about races. They know about races. The Isthmian Games were held kind of like the Olympics, not too far from there. Did I pronounce that right? Isthmian. They had the isthmus. And so they were familiar with this. He said, those who run a race, there's only one that wins that. But he says, you as Christians, you need to run in such a way that you obtain it. Talking about, he's kind of changed from the physical to the spiritual. Therefore, he before he ends that, he says, and everyone who competes for the prize is temperate in all things. Again, you go back to the physical. The guy who goes out here and he's going to train and prepare for a race, he's not going to overdo anything. He's not going to overeat. He's not going to oversleep. He's not even going to over-exercise to some point, okay? He's going to be preparing himself for that race. He said they're temperate in all things. Now, the application there is they're temperate, if we make that spiritual application, temperate in all things that are not sinful, okay? He's not talking about being temperate in sinful things, okay? They're temperate in all things, but they do it to obtain a perishable crown. He said, but we for an imperishable crown. We need to be temperate in all things in order to receive the imperishable crown, that home in heaven. And it's a wonderful thing here because he talks about how many is going to win the race here on this earth, or a physical race? One. But he says we will have an imperishable crown. There's going to be more than one winner. Okay, somebody else is not going to beat us out as long as we finish the race. If we finish the race and we compete according to the rules, then we will win an imperishable crown. We'll have that eternal home in heaven with him. He says, therefore, in light of this, I run not with uncertainty. That tells me Paul knows where he's running to. He's not just out here running, wondering where the end of the race is. He's got a goal in mind, and he is running towards that goal. I don't run with uncertainty. I know what I'm doing. Thus I fight, not as someone who beats the air. Not only do I know where I'm going, I know who I'm fighting. Who's our adversary? The devil. The devil is our adversary. And Paul says, I'm not just out here like some shadow boxer, throwing punches into the air. I know who I'm fighting. I know who my enemy is. I know who the one is who's trying to defeat me. He said, but I discipline my body and bring it into subjection, lest when I have preached to others, I myself should become disqualified. Paul says, I'm disciplining myself. I'm giving things up. Some things that might have been okay for him to do, some of these things that he's talked about. He said, I'm bringing my body into subjection. Why? Because there is a possibility he could lose his own soul. He said, after I preach to others, that I could become disqualified. This is a constant thing with Paul. It's an everyday thing. It's not a one and done kind of thing. You do it one day and it's over with. This is a constant battle. It's a constant exercise. It's a constant discipline with Paul. It should be with us as well. Thank you for the comments and the questions. And Brian will have it Sunday morning, chapter 10.
You got my birthday card?
Do what?
You got my birthday card?
I got your birthday card.
Yeah.
How old are you?
We've had this debate already.
Oh, man.
Oh, yeah. He's the guy. You didn't give me a chance.
Happy birthday. Once you get them started, he goes really he becomes a brother.